Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to Saturday Night Scary Stories here on the Scary Stories NYC channel. I'm your old pal Bigfoot, and I've got a special treat for you this week. Our longtime collaborator, Madeline Starr, is back.
That's right. And I'll be hosting the show each Saturday night as we head into the scariest time of year, Halloween season.
So, Maddie, do you need me to get you up to speed on our continuing stories?
Well, you tell me. The way I see it is that both stories are about young women sacrificing part of themselves because of a deep connection to the men they care about, and finding that sometimes the whole can be greater than the parts. Oh, and werewolves.
Yeah, werewolves. That's the part of the stories that I like.
Yes. Jenny finds that mastering the Lycan beast inside her husband Bryan makes them both stronger, while Marcia and her boyfriend are trying to join forces and defeat the dogmen haunting them in order to create a new life together for themselves. I see the dogmen and werewolves as a metaphor for the...
Meta? You're not going all meta on us, are you?
Of course not, Mr. Bigfoot. Yes, the stories are going to be very scary, with multiple dogman sightings, encounters, and experiences each week.
Folks, I'll see you all on Tuesday. Good luck, Maddie, and congrats on the new hosting gig.
Thanks, Bigfoot. As you may remember, last week, Marcia and her boyfriend got chased through a suburban neighborhood by creepy dogmen lurking hidden in the branches of the trees above the streets and lanes. They've made it back to the boyfriend's parents' house and have run upstairs to his room to collect themselves and decide what to do next. Let's rejoin the story in the boyfriend's own words as life with Dogman continues.
It was 3 a.m. up in my room when I awoke to see Marcia staring out my window at the backyard. "Are they still there?" I asked as she jumped in the air, the sound of my voice surprising her. I wondered how much sleep she had gotten. She motioned for me to come look, so I did. All through the bushes and trees at the edge of our yard came red eye shine. As I looked, a dark figure darted across the yard from one patch of trees to another. It was one of the gray dogmen. That's what they all were, and I knew it. "Who cares?" I asked. "As long as they stay down there, what difference does it make?" "It's not healthy," she offered, but I rolled my eyes to that. "What's not healthy," I suggested, "is to obsess over things you have no control over." "But we do have control over it," she insisted, "or you do. You can call the dark dogman to protect us." At this point, we slid down into our disagreement about how to interact with the huge dogman of the woods who had chosen to protect me from the others. Marcia felt that he had offered himself to be on duty to protect us, so we should have him perform his duty. My view is more along the line of this beast man was doing us a huge favor and asking nothing in return. The least we could do would be to try to fend for ourselves and only call him when there was absolutely no other choice. I said, if the dogmen were still there in the morning, maybe then we should summon the giant one. As for tonight, I felt we were safe. Marcia disagreed that we were safe, pointing out that the creatures were staring at us. They stood all around the property and stared up at the bedroom. How did we know it was safe to be sleeping in the center of their energy field? What were they actually doing out there? "Look," I said as soothingly as I could, "it's not long till Halloween. After that, we're home free and never have to see the dogmen again. Let's try not to let them stress us out in the meantime." Marcia, of course, proceeded to get a lot more stressed out. She insisted one of them had run over to the house and she couldn't see it any longer, but it must be beneath us. I could hear sounds outside that didn't feel right. In fact, it sounded like a dogman was attempting to scale the outside of the house and get up to us on the second floor. I asked Marcia to stop focusing on the dogmen. The more she thought about them, the more frightened she got. The more frightened she got, the more empowered and emboldened they got. She told me it was too late for that, and that the dogmen were now climbing the building. Oh, how I wished I could be asleep right then. I just wanted to sleep. Marcia needed to sleep as well, but instead, she was freaking out and giving the dogmen ideas about how best to bother us. There were some weird sounds, as though some part of the house broke off outside and fell. So I looked out the window to see what that was. What I was greeted with, though, was the head of one of the gray dogmen, peeking up over the edge of the roof and looking straight at me. It locked its bright red glowing eyes on mine, but I quickly looked away. Before I could pull the shade down, that creature propelled itself 10 feet from the edge of the roof, up, over, and right against the window with a slam. The speed of its surprising move had caught me off guard, and I tripped over my own feet, pulling back from the window pane. The dogman's hideous, hairy nose face was pressed against the glass, staring in at me like a monster from a funhouse. This was a filthy-looking animal, and the only thing that could have been uglier to see than this creature was this creature pressing its face against our glass window. I did what anyone would have done in my situation. I pulled the shade down so I didn't have to see it anymore. Marcia said, "That's not gonna hold him," but I really felt like it would. The things needed to stop staring at us, and we needed to stop staring at them. Marcia begged me to call the large dark dogman. I started to remind her that we were only supposed to call him in emergencies, but she gave her strongly held opinion that a dogman outside your second-story window was an emergency. It was a hard point to argue with, so I gave up and settled down on the floor in a cross-legged position, trying to become comfortable so I could focus mentally. I could hear the dogman scratching at the window and whining. I shut it out, and all sounds and vibrations, closing my eyes and quieting my mind. When I felt as though I were in the right place, I called for the dogman, the large black protector dogman. I presented to him my feelings about Marcia panicking and the gray dogman swarming outside of our window. Then I thanked him whether he could make it or not, and brought myself out of the trance. "Did it work?" I heard Marcia ask me. It wasn't a question I knew how to answer, but I pondered it anyway. Did it work? Did I reach the black dogman? Did he hear me? Was he going to respond? I didn't know if any of those things had happened, so I didn't know if it had worked. I suggested we move to my mother's sewing room. She asked why. I answered that it was the only room upstairs with no windows in it. Marcia lifted the shade to see if the dogman was still on the other side. He snapped at her fingers with his teeth, and she squealed, pulling her hand back. Yep, it was still there. Marcia positioned herself by my other window and immediately gasped. I looked out and saw what she saw. The dogmen were crisscrossing our back lawn, racing about. You could see them running in a dark blur from one side of the yard to the other. I saw one run toward the house and heard a thudding sound downstairs. "More of them are climbing the house," Marcia observed. "We're getting swarmed." Out in the night, right at that moment, there came a disturbance so loud that it didn't only stop me and Marcia in our tracks, it stopped the dogman outside as well. We, all of us, all at once, heard the loudest, saddest, angriest, fiercest wolf howl we had ever heard. Although loud enough to rattle you to the core, that howl was not from out back. It was from a somewhat great distance. "We're about to be overwhelmed by the dogman, aren't we?" asked Marcia, looking me deep in my eyes and clearly ready to begin crying. What happened next? Find out next week as Life with Dogman continues. Madeline?
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the all-new episode of Bryan's Lycan Troubles right after this.
And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman Story.
Last week, Bryan and Ginny got hired by Cosplay Zombies to work with them through early November at a Halloween haunted house located inside the forest. Having arrived at a way to support themselves, the couple wandered deeper into the woods, discussing their other major problem, that Bryan is afflicted with lycanthropy, over which he seems to have no control. Let's rejoin the story as Bryan's Lycan troubles continue.
Jenny watched as Bryan mutated in front of her very eyes. Hair by hair grew out of his ever-enlarging arms. He grew taller even as he bent down in obvious discomfort. As frightening as this vision was, Jenny remembered that this was her husband, and she remained, hovering protectively around him during the change. The idea of him running off again was more than she could bear. She would remain close and try to persuade him to stay, but if he went, she would hold on tight and go with him wherever that meant going. Bryan seemed extremely unhappy with this particular transformation, and Jenny's empathy went out to him, wishing she could stop what was happening, for him even more than for herself. Bryan leaned back and howled to the sky in misery and torment. Jenny spoke to him soothingly, reassuringly. She talked him through the entire experience. As Bryan transformed in most cases, he would be as full of energy when it ended as a 5-year-old who ate a box of chocolates. But this time, he appeared emotionally and physically drained by what was happening. As the transformation concluded, Bryan sat down on the dirt, staring at the ground with sad dog eyes, and Jenny threw herself around him, holding him and comforting him. "Don't worry, Bryan," she said. "Stick with me and I'll guide you through everything, honey. Everything that happens, I'll be here for you." "Wow!" came a cry to Jenny's left. Turning suddenly, she was faced with a sight that she had not prepared to see. It was her new boss, Bryan's too. As Bryan breathed heavily and recovered, Jenny stood looking into the eyes of the bearded man we'll call Calvin, who owned and ran the Halloween haunted house ride they had just been cast to play zombies in. Now Calvin was staring at Jenny and her husband Bryan, who had transformed into an actual 9 or 10 foot tall Lycan dogman. And Jenny wondered how much he had seen. "What did you make that costume out of?" Calvin asked, his eyes wide like a rich kid on Christmas. "Oh, odds and ends," answered Jenny. figuring out that he must not have seen the transformation if he asked a question like that. "Bryan, my man," called Calvin, and the werewolf looked in his direction. "Is it animatronic? How do you operate it?" Jenny answered for Bryan, insisting that he couldn't speak clearly while in the costume, but she gave a non-committal answer. When pressed, she replied that the costume functioned utilizing Bryan's own personal, patented trade secrets, which she was not free to divulge the nature of. Calvin walked closer, eager to study the costume. Jenny stopped him, urging him to keep back. Calvin laughed. "Why? Is the werewolf going to tear me up?" Jenny tried to laugh, but the image he had just put in her head made her very nervous. It really wasn't technically out of the realm of possibility that what he described might actually happen, and she knew it. Jenny tried to laugh at his joke anyway, and wasn't sure she had succeeded. "The costume," she said, "is a bit experimental and fragile." "Yeah, fragile," Jenny told him. "You can't touch it or it might fall off him. That's what it is." "Well, it's still fantastic," Calvin gushed. "I could swear I was looking at an actual werewolf. A huge one at that." Bryan started grooming himself in weird places, making Calvin laugh and unnerving Jenny. She quietly nudged him to get him to stop doing that in front of their boss. He didn't. "It's an incredible sight, isn't it?" agreed Jenny. "Well, we'd better go now to test the costume in the forest. Yeah, we better go test the costume in the forest. Bye." Wait, don't go," shouted Calvin. "I've got to get that costume in my haunted house show." "I'll offer you twice the pay, Bryan. Twice the pay of playing a zombie to play the werewolf. What do you say?" Bryan the Lycan stood there, glaring at the small human male in front of him. Then he looked at his protector, Jenny. She was talking to the man, so Bryan decided not to eat him. But he still didn't like the man, or humans in general. Except for Jenny, of course. She was his friend, and he preferred to be in her presence. He didn't know why. He didn't experience emotions as complicated as wondering why about anything. He knew he wanted to stay with Jenny, but he didn't want the small human male to continue to talk to her. When that man talked to Jenny, then Jenny didn't pay attention to Bryan. That was a concept simple enough for Bryan to grasp, and he grew increasingly bored of waiting for the intruder to leave. Bryan decided to growl at the man. Maybe he would get the message and leave them alone. So Bryan, the werewolf, growled. Carl was even more amazed. "That sounds exactly like what I would expect the growl of a giant werewolf to sound like. How did you create that? It doesn't sound like a lion. It doesn't sound like a wolf. What is that sound effect? And how do you play it?" Carl was full of questions and craning his neck to see the so-called costume more clearly without actually getting any closer. "Make him do it again," Calvin asked. "Make him growl at me some more." "Oh, Calvin," answered Jenny, "I'm not sure you really want any more of that. Anyway, like I said, we have to go practice, so we'll see you later, okay?" "Triple your current pay," Calvin shouted. "Final offer. I can't afford a penny more." Bryan turned and started walking away. Okay, 5 times what I'm paying you now," Jenny called out softly to Bryan, who stopped in his tracks and looked at her. She asked him to wait with her eyes, and he let out a long, annoyed, groaning sigh that made Calvin chuckle. Jenny thought nervously about what she was doing. It made no sense, but she really wanted that money. She blurted out that they would take the gig, but then quickly added it was a 2-person act. Bryan played the werewolf, and she played "You're his master and trainer, is that it?" asked Calvin. Yes, that's it. I'm the werewolf trainer. We do our act together because Because it's so hard for Bryan to see where he's going inside that big, bulky costume, he needs me to help him, Jenny rambled, hoping she was making sense. Calvin brightened up. How about you're the bikini-clad werewolf trainer? Calvin was obviously seeing how much he was going to be able to get for his money. Jenny stared at him in a confused manner, and he gave up quickly. Okay, well, maybe you can be a mad scientist lady or a vampire or something so you fit in the theme of the house. We can discuss details later, but can I get a handshake now? Calvin took 2 steps toward the strange couple, holding his hand out, and Bryan growled loudly. Calvin took 2 steps right back and put his hand in his pocket. Wow, it's so believable, Calvin enthused. I can practically imagine I'm smelling his body odor from way over here. Oh, yeah, said Jenny, thinking fast. The costume is really hot inside, so, yep, bad smells. She shrugged her shoulders and tried to look cute, but she really wanted this conversation with her boss over before her husband ate him for dinner. Can we go over the details and budgeting in the morning? Asked Calvin, and Jenny accepted even as Bryan put her on his back and ran away. Calvin, who had been awed already, was utterly stunned by the exit. He wondered how to possibly work that into the act, but there was not space enough within the haunted house for such an exhibition. That was it, Calvin decided. They needed to build an addition in the backyard, a huge cage to hold the werewolf that he could break out of the back of, running off into the forest, then maybe returning later in the tour to peer inside a window and scare some of the customers. Calvin was more excited creatively than he had been since he had his original idea to create the haunted house attraction at his family's old abandoned mansion in the first place. In fact, he was already contemplating the costs of shooting a werewolf feature film using Bryan's amazing costume. Heck, he needed to sign Bryan up as a costume maker, and the two of them would make millions, creating super low budget but incredibly realistic looking horror movies. Calvin was certain that Bryan had to be an effects genius, and everything in his vision looked green. That was because Calvin had big dollar signs flashing in his eyes. Meanwhile, in the forest, Bryan ran free. He was a great beast at one with nature itself. He had no thought in his head, but he was content. His protector was on his back. He was running, unfettered. He enjoyed the speed, and he enjoyed the freedom, and to him, that one moment was all of eternity in one place and time. Jenny clung tightly to her husband, her dogman, her responsibility, and now her meal ticket. Would she be able to actually get Bryan in his Lycan form to participate in a haunted house show? Or would they be better off to just keep running? While Bryan merged with eternity, Jenny was lost in worry, unsure of what was happening to her or what would happen the next morning or even the next moment. And so, to find out what happened next, Jenny is going to have to come back next week. Same dog time, same dog channel, and listen to the next episode of Bryan's Lycan Troubles, just the same as you.
Come back every Saturday night as I host another episode of Saturday Night Scary Serials, right here on the Scary Stories NYC channel.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.